Okay, everyone, this is Tonson Fairmont, and thank you so kindly for joining us on the Brilliance and Commerce House of Freedom Trust webinar for January 17th, 2018. It's really a joy to have all of you present, and we apologize for January 9th, which had a lot of technical problems. Hopefully today, everything will go smoothly. We have with us our grand speaker, Randall Hillner, who will be appearing in a few minutes. We also have our Director of Public Relations, Peter Chang. Peter, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, and a little bit louder, please.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to the Trust webinar, Natural Law Trust webinar. Nice to meet you all. And I will start by reading Thompson's bio.
Do you have, Peter, a better way to make your sound improve?
No, this is the best it can be. Can you hear me clearly?
Just speak up. I think it'll be okay.
Okay, how's this? How do I sound now?
Pretty okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so Thompson Fairmont is the founder of Brilliance in Commerce and is a consultant on debt elimination, natural law trusts, and asset protection. He's also a meditation teacher, celestial musician, heavenly artist, and writer on Vedic science, higher states of consciousness, and the dawn of the age of enlightenment. Dawson was educated at the Maharishi International University in America and at Maharishi European Research University in Switzerland, where he received the title Governor of the Age of Enlightenment in 1977 at age 22. He's a former keynote speaker at numerous international investment conferences worldwide, on ocean cruises, and at many exotic tax haven resorts around the Pacific Rim and the Caribbean. He's the author of the 1997 book, Sovereignty Consciousness, the later books, The Natural Law Trust, Asset Protection for Peaceful People, and How to Outright Cancel 100% of Your Unsecured Debt, as well as a new forthcoming book, Cosmic Renaissance, Enlightenment in the Arts. Johnson has been a manager of various pure natural law, sovereign, irrevocable trusts since 1993. He has either spoken at or attended hundreds of seminars on asset protection, tax strategies, individual sovereignty, government exposés, patriot campaigns, high yield investments, the UCC, the banking cabal, commercial remedies, mortgage fraud, debt elimination, prosperity programs, the global currency reset, and more. Out of the thousands of programs, techniques, methods, and systems that attempt to provide solutions for individuals and families to government, tyranny, and banking corruption, since 2002, Thompson has been focusing on the few solutions that actually work consistently. Today, he is sharing with us a few of his pearls, which have enjoyed nearly 100% success rate. His simple system for canceling unsecured debts and his approach to invincible protection from asset protection risks by using one of the best trusts in the world. And I guess from here, I'll let you take it away, Thompson, if I didn't leave anything out that you would like to add.
No, thank you very kindly. So everyone, Peter is our Director of Public Relations. You may have communicated with him before in the past. If you have not yet had the privilege of being a trust client, you may find that you will have communication with Peter and also with our trust writer and speaker who will be coming on in a moment. So go ahead to the next image. Here we have some of the dates of our webinars. So today, January 17th, 2018. Next, Wednesday, February 7th. Wednesday, March 7th. And Wednesday, April 11th. All of these will be at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Figure out the equivalent in your own time zone. We went previously on Tuesdays, so please note the change to Wednesdays. And houseoffreedomtrust.com with dashes between each of the words is the generic site, although we encourage anyone who came through an affiliate to please use your affiliate link. All right, next. For future webinar attendance links and numbers, we recommend you subscribe to the Brilliance in Commerce newsletter if you have not done so already. It's published by La Verite. And again, at houseoffreedomtrust.com with dashes between each of the words. Click on More and then Newsletter Sign Up. And also we have a phone number, 360-200-7521. Next. So the basic introduction to our trust for anyone who doesn't already know is we call them international because they work in most countries. We call them natural law because it's a little bit better than common law. And this is how the creatives, the change makers, conscious wealth managers, and contributors to the golden age are quietly transacting sacred commerce through an advanced asset protection instrument, previously a best-kept secret of the super rich. For those of you who are watching this visually, kindly be patient as I recite this for those who dialed in by telephone and don't have the image in front of them. Peaceful people can benefit from operating one or more of these trusts, which concentrate the best asset protection secrets of the elite into the fewest words and simplifies the language so as to minimize legalese and maximizes common politeness and understandability. These trusts can be operated in most countries anywhere in the world. Trust clients may become either trustees or creators, beneficiaries, and managers. These international pure natural law sovereign irrevocable trusts have no income tax filing requirements. They are infinitely flexible and can be adapted to any ethical, lawful, and noble purpose. They have a 100% success rate, meaning they have never been penetrated or invalidated in over 3 decades of use. This has been the trust of choice for those preparing for a global currency reset as the best vehicle for holding wealth and for preparing one's estate for generations to come. Heirs can be endowed with successorship seamlessly with no time delay, no probate, and no death taxes. All right, so that's basically an introduction to it, and let's move on. I would like to introduce to you my wonderful good friend and associate and the director of our trust department, Randall Hillner, and share with you that he is one of the world's premier trust writers. He is the founder of White Light Unlimited and House of Freedom Trusts. He is a trustee of One People's Public Trust, the creator of the International Natural Law Trust, and the director of the Trust Department of La Verite's Brilliance in Commerce. Mr. Hillner graduated from junior college in Haverhill, Massachusetts in 1965, and from 66 to 71, he served in the U.S. Navy on nuclear submarines, Dolphin qualified, and was a weapons control computer technician. In 79, he graduated from Goddard College, Vermont, with a BA in education. Over the years in his studies of trust, he found that the best trusts in the world are the kind that the elite and super rich have used. So being, they have been kept quiet and are not taught in law schools or universities. For this creme de la creme of trust knowledge, private mentors prove to be far superior to institutionalized education. Thus, in the 80s, he apprenticed with Mr. Val Bentley, who had 30-plus years experience in trust law in Sacramento and the San Francisco Bay Area. Likewise, he studied trust law with luminaries like Austin Scott, George Burgertz, and many others. Over the years, he gradually wrote trusts for more and more prestigious clients throughout the world and has continued to gain and disseminate state-of-the-art knowledge staying on the forefront of the perfection of the craft. Okay, so thank you, Randall, for being with us. And we would like to welcome you. I guess we can move on to the next image. And we're going to do a recap of the last webinar briefly, and then get right into today's material. Randall, you are on.
Well, that's quite the image you have there. So I'm looking into a mirror 4 ways. Anyway, thank you very much, Townsend, for that introduction. And it's a privilege to be here and talk with everybody. I think briefly last webinar that we had, we talked the essence of what a trust was. It's basically a contract between 3 people. That would be the settlor or the creator, trustees, and the beneficiaries, and how it all works, how it's all put together into a package form where the assets are endowed with multiple protection ability, how the trustees, the owner of the assets, gives up ownership for the benefit of having the trust hold the assets for protection and non-vulnerability. And the beneficiaries get to have that on a long-lasting effect. Since there's no death tax because the trust never dies, goes on and on and on. People come and go in the trust, but the trust continues to travel forward. So with that, I guess, unless anybody had any questions right now, we'll just start. Mostly today, we're going to talk about the trusteeship and what it entails.
Randall, we did have a couple of questions put in by chat. Would you like to take them now or at the end?
I can take them now.
All right. So this one from James says, I'm curious if you know what they mean by the skeleton trust spoken of at the time of the RV appointment.
Oh, what Townsend has done and what a few other people have done is to set up a partial trust where you are going to take your, let's say we're talking about foreign currency, you're going to take that and you're going to get a notarized statement that you have actually transferred that asset, though that currency, into a trust and have it notarized so that it's no longer in your hands. It belongs to the trust and the trustees, and they will protect it until the RV happens or there's a reset, and then we continue to write the rest of the trust, and then you can go and we'll open up a bank account. What you have with a skeleton trust is just the ability to transfer currency from your name to the name of the trust so that the trust does own the currency and not you. So that if something happens to you along the way, then there's no currency to be found. It all belongs to the trust.
Can you comment on the difference between the quality of protection of the skeleton trust and the House of Freedom Trust?
Well, we're talking about, I don't know, the House of Freedom Trust is the same thing. We have an unactivated trust form where people start. They have a name. They get the trustees they want to have. There's no need for beneficiaries at this time because is minimal paperwork, but you're going to have that minimal paperwork notarized by a notary, and then you stash it away and keep it in a safe place until you're ready to extend that out. Now, if you want to put other things into that trust, then you need to consider getting a full-on trust. Like some people already get a full trust so that they can put their house and their they may have personal valuable items that they want to protect as well.
Aren't most skeleton trusts statutory?
If you're talking about somebody else's trust, I have no idea. There's statutory and there's common law and natural law. The common law and the natural law are basically non-statutory, and that's what we talk about. Talk about a non-statutory or common law, natural law trust document. There's no registration for it. There's no interference, and it's strictly between you and the trustees and the beneficiaries.
Okay, his next question is also if Trust A settles Trust B, and for the understanding of everyone listening, what he means is if Trust number one becomes the settler or the grantor and gives its assets to the second trust, must the trustee of Trust B be different from A?
Yes. You can't be the trustee of the second trust because you're the trustee of the first, and there's no separation. In other words, there's no separation between trust one and trust two. And that's why you need to have two trustees. You have to have trustees to separate the grantor from the assets. So trust one, if it decides to split up some of its assets, would have to have another trustee. The trust one could be the settler for trust two, and trust one could set up 1, 2, or 3 or more trusts, but for each one you have to have at least one different trustee. So let's say that for trust one, Joe Smith is one of the trustees and Elizabeth Smith is the second one. Then for the second trust number 2, Joe Smith could be one of the trustees, but there would need to be a second non-related trustee, and so on down the line. There needs to be separation between each trust, just like you can't be the grantor and the trustee and the beneficiary. You can't wear 3 hats. You can only wear 2, and preferably you only want to wear 1. Most people in the first 30 years that I worked with this, basically people that had wealth wanted to stop working and stop worrying about their assets. So they created a trust. They found 2 trustees that were trusted. One could be a relative and the other one could be a friend, but you can't use 2 related trustees. And then they would be the beneficiaries. Then they could sit back and the trustees would administer the whole asset base in the trust. And if they didn't know fancy financial process, then they could go out and hire management consultants, etc., to take care of the assets.
Okay, thank you. That segues perfectly into today's topic, which is how to be a good trustee. So why don't we go ahead with that? One of the other chat comments was, could we hold the questions until the end? There is one other question that I'm going to come back to when you open it up to Q&A. But yeah, let's go ahead and start your topic today if you're ready.
Well, fine. I'm basically going to talk about what's the trustee and what does he do and how does it all work. So the first thing is that you have to have two trustees to administer the trust. Now, if they have experience in financial process, then they can also be the ones to manage the assets of the trust, but there has to be at least two. If you decide to have just one trustee in the beginning, there must be a second trustee in the background that can take over. So a second trustee, it's always best to have two trustees if possible. And they have to, whenever they make decisions, they have to be in unanimous decision. Now the successor trustee, that second trustee can be the successor trustee. And then the trustees also can add more. So if the state becomes extremely large, then more trustees and more financial advisors can be used. If we're talking about value reset and all of a sudden there's significant amounts of money in the trust, then you might want to consider, like some people say, well, can I take I have 3 different currencies. Is it best to hold it all in one, or should I have 3 trusts? And I say, well, ultimately it's a matter of choice. It depends on how much currency you have for each one and how much you want to separate it out. So that can be done either way. Now, in the document that you get is the trustees are recognized, they have to be appointed, they have to accept the position, they have to understand what's going on, they have to understand the powers of the trustee and what they're going to be able to do, and so forth. Any person, any legal age person that can do anything on their own can be a trustee. So you have to be of age, and you are really open. The grantor, settlor, is open to anybody that he thinks that he trusts and he values in his life to take care of the estate. And as I said, at least 50% of the trustees need to be non-related to the settlor. So with that, we'll go to, I'm reading notes here because this trusteeship is really, it's very complicated in one way, it's simple in another. So once the trustees have accepted their position, they've been appointed, they've accepted it, then the trust becomes whole. So you have the grantor has signed his part of the documents, the trustees have signed their part of the documents. There's paperwork where the beneficiaries are noted, and it goes from there. Now, if you have the complete trust, then you can go, the 2 trustees can go to the bank and then open up an account. And you're going to, in the beginning, you're going to open up a simple checking account for the trust. Now, some banks may want a certain sum to be put into the account to open it. Others will just open it, but I think most banks now want $50 to $100. I'm not sure. And trustees have full authority to do whatever is appropriate for the trust as long as it's not contrary to any law. In other words, to keep the trust legal, it must stay within the confines of natural law. Do no harm, honor your contracts, etc. The trust is not required to ask any government agency for permission to act. In other words, it's a contract between three people and three people only. A statutory trust would be, you would go to a lawyer or you'd go to the government agency and you'd file it with the county, etc. And that is just hooking you into the system. And you don't need to do that. The guide is basically all within the trust indenture.
Yeah, Randall?
Yes?
Just let Peter know when you want him to switch to the next image. Like, say next,
Oh, okay. Well, let me...
He's on trustee guide right now.
Hold on. I've got this. Okay, trustee guide. All right. So
Thanks.
I had that little thing up to tell me how many people were on there, and I didn't realize it was in the way. So what guides their decision? It's all in the indenture. It's laid out step by step by step. And then since it's all in the indenture and what the trustees can do, what their powers are, and that's what they do. And then the trustees have the ability to make amendments and additions to the trust, whatever they feel is important to improve the performance of the trust, but it has to be in coordination or it can't be contradictory to the indenture itself. And the minutes control the trustees. So in other words, when any action is taken, all that action is written down and the trustees must abide by that.
While you're talking about indenture, you want to tell newcomers what the word indenture means?
Trust indenture is an initial contract. Out of a 35, the trust is basically about 35 to 36 pages, depending on how many beneficiaries are involved. There may be up to 40 pages. But the indenture part, which is the initial contract, which lays out the process that everybody must follow, is the first 15 pages. So you have your indenture, then you have the appointments and assignments, you have the beneficial assignments, and then you have the minutes. And the minutes are where everything is kept in privacy, basically. The minutes are never shown to anybody without a subpoena. So you'll show, like when you go to a bank, some banks will want to see, first of all, they're going to want the trustees to be there. Second of all, they're going to want to possibly see the indenture. In other words, it comes in two or three parts. Sometimes the bank will just take a 5-page part of the trust, which I put at the end, that's a trust certification and the minutes addendum. So that can go to the bank. Sometimes the bank will want to see the indenture and they'll want to see all the assignments, which is okay. But the minutes are to be kept private. Next slide. There's no need for a bond. Some statutory trusts want a bond, but in a private trust, there's no need for a bond. Next. What powers do they have? Well, they don't have general powers, but they have, I'm not going to read them all because there's 2 pages of specific powers. But they basically can do anything that any private person can do. Trade, barter, sell, buy, real estate, property, currency, anything. And how much control do they have? They have all the control. Trustees basically control the trust, and they basically have legal title to all the assets in the trust. They have legal title, but they have no equitable title. That's an important factor to know, that even though the trustees own it, they're under a fiduciary responsibility, not, and they have no equitable control whatsoever. All the equity goes to the beneficiaries. How do they act within these powers? They act like a grown human being that does no harm and carries out contracts. If you'd like, I can read some of the powers. Would you like me to do that?
Just a sampling.
Okay, they can buy, sell, operate any business or business activity, anything like that, anything to do with business they can do. Securities, any kind of securities, they can do leases, etc. Collect gifts, contributions, create new trust organizations. They can enter into, engage in any lawful contracts that anybody else can do, and buy and sell and acquire, hold, manage, short and long, establish, go into, take the trust and buy commodities, they can buy shares, they can go on the market, they can get a broker and buy and sell different shares on the market. Gold, silver, diamonds, it's all available. So so we're talking about property, and you have to remember that the trustees also can sue, and the trust can be sued. So that's an important fact to keep in the back of your brain always, that if the trustees have to protect the trust if somebody sues it. In other words, this is why people say, oh, I want to put my car into the trust. I say no, because the car can damage somebody. So you never want to put anything into the trust that can damage somebody. And to take it even on a more subtle level, if the trust owns a piece of property, then insurance must be carried, and any repairs to maintain the property for safety purposes must also be done by the assets of the trust. So how much control they have? They basically have all the control that any normal person would have in his private dealings in public life. How do they act with these powers? Depending on how upstanding they are, that's how they act. They act according to protect. Their whole job is to protect the assets for the beneficiaries. Next. Trustee meetings, it can, depending on the busyness of the trust, I've had trusts where really not a lot has been done other than the beneficiaries receive a monthly return on their investments, and the trustees would sign and make a note of that. But there doesn't have to be a meeting for that. But at least once a year, the trustees must have a meeting and must go through the last year's process, and that must be signed, so that you always keeping track of what the trustees do. Every time there's a decision or something is done that affects the beneficiaries, the trustees must make a note of it, and it must be included in the minutes of the trust. How the rules and decisions made, it's up to the trustees, but it's also, the trustees can always talk with the grantor. Grantor can go to the meetings and say, well, you know, I'm not so sure I want to do that. And typically if the trustees are really close to the grantor and the beneficiaries, then they can be made that way. They can bend their decisions to serve, so that the trust is serving the grantor and the beneficiaries. Next. I think I already went. The duties are to protect the assets of the trust. Trustees are bound by the duty that when they sign as trustee, they decide to be trustee, they are duty bound to do the best job they can to provide protection and enhancement of the assets in the trust. Next. Questions? That's about it. Now, that's the gist of the trusteeship is there. And if you're going to have questions about that, and this is mostly what I get when I have a new client, as they're saying, well, what about this duty, and what about this, and how does that affect this? So ask any questions you want, and I'll try to put it in perspective. So, who's got a question?
All right, so those who know how to open the chat, if you have the computer connection, you can submit your question by chat. You can also click on the raise hand, and we'll see your raised hand, and we can call on you. And those in by telephone, let's see. We also have a question here. If the settlor asks me as a trustee to set up a company as a second trustee, how do I structure that?
Say again, slower, please.
If the settlor asks me as a trustee to set up a company as the second trustee, How do I structure that?
The settler can create a company, whether it's another trust or corporation, and either do a business or be the trustee.
Yeah, and I think further detail would be merited if you were a trust client of House of Freedom Trust. Randall would be happy to go into more details in your individual situation. That's the kind of thing that would kind of vary from case to case. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more. It gets more specific when, first of all, when you have um, when you have the trust document, you'll have read. You're going to receive a trust manual, which is about 20 pages. It really expands on what we've just talked about. And then the trust indenture will happen, and then how to get an EIN number and a few other things. But basically, via email, I do a lot of correspondence with the new client to make sure that they're clear on how to make it all happen. It's really not difficult once you've got everything together.
All right. The next question is how can you pay a trustee so that someone would do this job?
Sure. If you were working with a $20 million estate, you would definitely want to pay the trustee his due. Especially if he's doing, all the financial work. You either pay him or you pay an advisor. So yes, and if it's if you just have a house in a trust, then in the early days, I know that when I was acting as trustee, sometimes that people would say, "Oh, we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to do it at a restaurant," and we'd go and conduct our meeting at the restaurant, or maybe before, and then I would get a dinner, and that was all it was needed. And that happened maybe once or twice a year, but when it got into me having to scout out and find information for them, or to get some important structure going, then I would charge.
All right. Someone submitted this comment. We've had some colored lines in the images, and I don't want to spend more than a minute on this. We should move on to the other questions. But this person very kindly said it comes from someone who annotated the screen in the View Options menu at the top. Carrie, are you there? I'm going to unmute you and see if you know anything about that. Are you there?
Yeah, it's just somebody would have selected that, and then they'd be dragging their cursor around.
But why would that display to everyone?
Because it's just how the system works. I don't know if somebody was doing it unknowingly or on purpose, but or just playing with what was there. But just good to know.
It's not Peter or myself or Randall. We know that. So
really something that the presenter would use, to point things out, maybe to draw a picture on their.
Right. But it seems it should only be visible on their computer and not on everybody else's.
Oh, it's visible on everybody's.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Looks like a doodling mechanism.
Yeah. All right, so the next question, so then can't that equity interest of the beneficiaries be attached in a claim?
No. I'm going to talk about that on the next meeting, but basically, no. The beneficiaries, what happens if somebody tries to claim that the beneficiary has this beneficial interest in the trust, the trustees will take the beneficial interest back and cancel it for a period of time, and then the suit would go away. And then when it goes away, then they would be reinstated. So
Okay.
that's a protection that the beneficiaries have. It's called, part of it's called a spendthrift part of the trust, where like some people set up a trust because they want to have their children, say they have two children, one is responsible and one is a little irresponsible. They may set it up so that if there's any problem with the irresponsible one, that the money beneficial interest would be taken back until he can straighten out his financial situation.
Sounds good. Next, we have, what is the specific process from the setting up of the skeleton trust at the bank at the currency exchange to finishing the partial natural trust?
Well, I'm still working on that, but either I'm going to be available during that time, and I'm going to probably see about putting together a thumb drive with the indenture on it, the rest of the indenture on it, and when you are ready to go and set it up, if I'm not around or I'm overwhelmed and busy, then the thumb drive would have the Word doc. It would have the rest of the trust in a Word document, and you would just go in and fill in the blanks. The instructions would all be in there, and you would just put it on the computer. It would come up, and you'd fill in the names, and it would be done. Then have it printed out and sign it.
May I, before you continue, just explain for the benefit of newcomers what they're referring to? We have the $2,500 House of Freedom Trust, which is the activated full on VIP, full privileges, ready to go trust. But then a lot of people were waiting for a windfall from various investments or a currency exchange or whatever, and didn't have the 2,500. And so we came up with the unactivated trust for a $250 down payment, and that would get the trust set up initially with the trustees assigned, the EIN or international number, business number assigned to it, the roles designated, the name of the trust given, the first few pages issued, but not so much so that one could open a bank account and start actually operating it. That's called the unactivated trust. So this person is asking, if they go to the exchange, the bank gives them a skeleton trust and puts the large amount of money into it. I would just say that you would pay the balance of $2,250 to get your natural law trust activated. Then Randall would, as he was saying, assist from that point to give you the rest of the trust and answers to any questions you may have about transferring assets.
Right. When you go to wherever you go to do your reval, you'll need that, at least that minimum amount of trust, and in it is a memorandum of the trust. A memorandum of the trust. It's the basic outline of the trust. It has a trust certification which has to be notarized, and that basically says that yes, we the trustees have control of the assets. You'll get an EIN number for it, and then it has a schedule addendum A, which is where you're going to list the different currencies. Then when you go to do the exchange, either I'll be there or you'll be, if you're not going to be in an area where I am, I will have thumb drives available, and I'll just, we'll send it off UPS overnight or something like that. And if you have enough time, then I'll do it up for you.
We'd also recommend a Proton Mail email address for those who are dealing with large amounts of money. That would encrypt all the email exchanges between Randall and yourself about the trust. Protonmail.com. The next question, is an EIN number required for a natural law trust? Randall, I'll do you the favor of just giving a very simple answer to that, and then you can add to it as you wish, but that's an easy one. EIN means Employer Identification Number. It's issued by the United States system, the IRS. It is not required if you're only going to use the trust to hold assets like a house or whatever. It's only needed if you're going to get a bank account open, and then it would be for banking purposes only, not for filing tax returns. Would you like to add anything?
No, you just covered it.
Yeah, and then if you're in another country, you get the equivalent in that country. In fact, some countries accept the U.S. EIN as the number, depending on what country it is.
Right, and sometimes, like I have a couple of clients that live in Canada, but they had friends in the U.S. So there's also what's called a foreign EIN number for a foreign trust, and the IRS will give that a number if you have an address in the U.S., even though the trust is placed or is going to be active in Canada. I don't know about other places. There are some countries that are really stubborn, and like I think in Europe, I have a couple of clients in Europe, and the federal government there wants them to turn it into a corporation. They don't really know trust law. Trust law basically comes from the English common law, and a lot of countries don't do that. They work on a totally different system, so they don't always accept the common law trust. But if you, so they're waiting for the RV exchange to happen so that they can come to the U.S. where they're going to exchange it, and then they can get a number here. And also working on a couple of clients in Australia where they're having a hard time getting a number because the Australian government doesn't want to recognize. Now, I don't know what happened in this particular case, but he kept going back and forth, and they still didn't issue it. So there's some places where it's a little bit more difficult to get a number than not. But if you're in the U.S., there's no problem. Puerto Rico or Canada. And I do have people in Australia that had no problem with it. And all I'm understanding is that maybe this client went about it in the wrong way. I don't know. He hasn't told me. He just says he's like hitting his head against the wall. So that could happen. But if in the U.S., you're all set.
Yeah, let me just add that Randall has put together a very wonderfully complete set of instructions on exactly what boxes to check and what questions to answer and what to answer. It's about a 15-minute process. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. It's done on the IRS website, and Randall has provided for each trust client a document that gives precise instructions, even with pictures, and then telephone consultation if you still have a question about it. So he's really made it user-friendly. I'm going to go to one of the raised hands here, and this is Carlene. Carlene, I have unmuted you, and you're on the air if you would like to ask your question.
I don't think I can do this right now because I don't have my audio on.
You sure don't. volume is about 10% what it should be.
Okay.
Should I come back to you in a few minutes?
Could you please? Thank you.
Okay, I'll mute you now. And the next one is Nathan. Nathan, you're on. Welcome to the show. You had your hand up. You had a question, Nathan? Okay, I guess Nathan's busy. All right, so we'll come back later to your questions. And the next question in the chat is regarding the trustee meetings. So you only have meetings if you are deciding something big. Otherwise, how often do you need to do a meeting? And you might also mention, it could be done online or something.
Yes, it definitely can be telephonic or through email or Skype or whatever. And it's just, well, if the grantor appoints the trustees and if the grantor becomes the executive manager, he will be on the account, on the bank account, along with the trustees, and he can run the daily, day-to-day operations. But if he's going to the trustees and him have to decide how much before he has to talk to the trustees about taking this action. And so the meeting has to be verified. And so it goes by, it can be email or a Skype call. Then somebody makes note of what that is. And then it's put in the minutes of the trust. And when you do that, if the trustees are not close by, then make sure everybody has a copy of that decision and those signatures. And the same with the whole trust. When you get the whole trust, both trustees should have a copy of the trust, and even the grantor uses a copy, and the original is put in a safe place.
Thank you. The next question is, what range of compensation is given to trustees?
Whatever you and the trustees decide to do. Like I said,
some get nothing because they don't have to do much. Others, it depends on how much work they have to do.
Yes, if they're going to administer and do the investment portfolio, then they would be compensated on a percentage basis of how much profit is made. They could be paid on an hourly basis. If they're not doing much, then dinner once a year. But you do need to have a meeting at least once a year. Usually it's in January, and you bring a close to the year's activity. And sometimes it's just copies of the bank statement going to each trustee. Everybody signs the minutes on that, and then it's stored with the minutes.
All right, next. This person asks, is it true the grantor owns all the assets?
No, the trust owns the assets. Actually, the trust doesn't own it. The trust holds it. The legal owner of the asset is owned by the trustees under legal fiduciary responsibility. He owns them as a trustee and not for himself. He owns it for the trust, but it's in his name. When you go, if the trust buys a house, the two trustees will go to the county to sign the register under the name of the trust, and they will sign as trustees. Once they become a trustee, they will, all the paperwork that they sign is Randall Hillner as trustee.
maybe this person could benefit from your explaining the irrevocable aspect, between the grantor and the trust, and why we do that.
Sure. Well, if an irrevocable trust keeps, in other words, it separates the assets from the owner, the previous owner, the grantor has this asset, and he gives it to the trust, and the trustees take legal ownership of it for the benefit of, it may be the grantor is a present time beneficiary. It may be that he's one of the beneficiaries and his children and grandchildren are going to get a portion of it, etc. So but once in an irrevocable trust, the one that we write, once the assets are turned over to the trust, the grantor cannot take those assets back into his own name.
I remember, Randall, one time when you almost fell off your chair laughing when I told you that Chase Bank wouldn't open a trust for me a few years ago because it didn't have the grantor signing on everything. And you were just laughing like, of course they'd like the grantor to sign on everything because it makes the trust a whole lot easier to penetrate. And
Sure.
it's not really worth the paper it's written on. That's called a revocable trust or a
Yeah.
grantor trust, which is a sham. And our trusts are the strongest in the world because they're irrevocable. That's one of the reasons anyway.
And it's non-statutory, so it doesn't have the effects of the lawyers having a hand in it.
Right.
A grantor trust is typically some couples just do a grantor trust. They call it an AB grantor trust, and all that does is eliminate probate. It doesn't separate the assets from the owner. They don't want to do that, maybe. But that means that if either one of the grantors injures somebody, then all those assets are open to suit.
I always tell people the reason you want it to be irrevocable is so that if you have a claim against you personally, the claimant cannot force you to revoke your transfer of those assets to the trust.
That's correct.
You can show them, no, it's irrevocable. I can't get the assets back even if I wanted to. And that actually protects you.
Right. And the same with the trustee. Even if a trustee is in an accident and somebody sues him, they still can't go after the assets of the trust because he's only the legal owner and he has no beneficial interest. And if the spendthrift paragraph in the trust is such that if somebody wants to sue one of the beneficiaries, then the trustees can withdraw the units of beneficial interest from that particular beneficiary. And so there's no assets to get there either. So the trust as a whole keeps protection on all of the assets.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Sarah. You have your hand up. Sarah, are you there? I'm sorry. I think I tried to unmute you. It should be unmuted now. Are you there, Sarah?
You can't hear me?
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Good. All right. Wonderful. Here's my question.
Welcome from Arizona.
Thank you. Let's say, okay, we have a creator / grantor settler, and we have a trustee, and we want to have a successor trustee because there's only going to be one active trustee. Is it possible to have the creator / grantor settler be a successor trustee?
No,
Okay.
not until a period of time has elapsed. In other words, you can't do it right away. Maybe 5, 6, 7 years down the road, that could happen. But I would still recommend that that doesn't happen, and that the successor trustee is still should be unrelated to the grantor and the beneficiaries. You want somebody to split the assets from the grantor, the original owner, and the beneficiaries.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. All right. It looks like Carlene, you're back. You have your microphone working?
I think so. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, no, we still can't hear you.
You still can't hear me. Okay. Is that any better? Is that okay?
I can't see your screen, but you may need to click on turning on the correct microphone as connected to Zoom.
Okay, I did check that, and okay, let's see here.
Well, sorry, dear. Check on that, and you can always do a chat to Zoom help, and they can tell you where to find the microphone setting. We'll go on to another question while you're working on that.
Okay, is that any better?
Okay, so we have, why is it not a good idea to be a grantor and a trustee?
There's no disconnection.
And why is the disconnection important?
Because then it's considered a revocable trust. Unless, okay, so if the grantor wants to be one of the trustees and he's not a beneficiary, then that would work. But if he's the only beneficiary, then he can't, it's not appropriate for him to be the trustee.
In other words, the grantor can be a trustee if he is signed off on an irrevocable trust, because really that grantor has no further control as a grantor over the trust. It's like ending one role and starting another role, right?
That is correct. When there's a page in the trust where the grantor relinquishes all control with anything to do with the trust. And so he can be a trustee, but there has to be, he can't be a beneficiary. He can be one of several beneficiaries, but basically, even if he is trustee, he must think as a trustee for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So yes, it is actually possible for the grantor to be one of the trustees as long as there's numerous beneficiaries.
Okay. Now, let's see. If you don't have people you can make trustee, what are your thoughts and recommendations of third-party trustees, and do you provide that service?
I'd be too busy. But I do have, and I can, if you need a trustee service, I do have a woman that does provide that. She's down in Texas, and I would not give her name out until I ask her about whether she wants to be her name made public. But yes, there are certain people will take on that duty, and this woman happens to be a CPA, and she's quite brilliant, and I've met her a number of times, and she's offered to do that, I think, already for a couple of our clients.
May I also add that that's one of the reasons for holding these webinars is we would like as many more people as possible to learn this science and art of trusts and become master trustees so that perhaps we'll have more professionals available for that service.
Well, yes, and I would say I would very much welcome somebody who wants to do that. And I have 8 law book volumes on my table that I must go through occasionally, just like the gentleman sitting in the chair on the screen. Is surrounded by books. And all my books are redlined, underlined, taped, messaged, arrowed, and I'm always looking up for a client, what needs to be done in their particular case. But essentially, like one set I have is used by all the judges across the country. It's the third restatement of trust law, and it's very consistent with what we have in our trust document. That's the first thing I did when I got that. I went through and I related every portion that was in our trust to a portion of what these books that the judges use in the courtroom. So it's pretty consistent.
All right. Next, can you elaborate on what constitutes not related in terms of the grantor and trustee?
Well, typically when I have a client ask me that, I say one trustee, you can have two friends or two associates that aren't related to you, or you can have one family member and one friend.
I think she's asking for the definition of related.
Well, blood, marriage,
Same household.
In your household. Like I have some clients that the grantor is the wife and the husband becomes a trustee, and then they pick up a third party non-related friend as the second trustee. So related means blood, marriage, employment, servitude, stuff like that.
Okay.
But that should do it. Somebody must be independent. There must be separation between the grantor and the assets and the trustee.
The next question is, I want to be trustee of my trust, but if I put my currency, etc., into the trust, then I am the grantor and cannot be the trustee, yes?
No, you can have a grantor. The trustee can put assets into the trust, and as long as there's another grantor, but you would definitely need to have a second trustee that's not related to you or the beneficiaries.
And we were saying earlier, too, that you can be the grantor, sign off, irrevocably transfer everything into the trust, and then take on the role of trustee.
It's better to have a friend be a nominee grantor.
Yes.
Then you can be the trustee. You can put your assets into it. You have a non-related second trustee, and then the beneficiaries.
Next question. Yeah.
It just keeps the separation more defined. The more definition and separation you have, the better off you are. Otherwise, it gets muddled.
Okay, next question. This may be a good one for everybody who's new to all this. What is the settler? And you could also talk about being, synonymous with grantor and creator.
Exactly. Those are all the names that are used: grantor, settler, creator. It's a choice. In the document, I usually use settler or grantor.
So it means the one who puts assets into the trust?
Well, typically, yes. typically that the grantor is the one that establishes the trust and puts the assets in. And then the trustees are one related and one non-related, or two non-related trustees, two friends.
What I've often told people is it's like a table, a four-legged table, where you have the settlor, you have two trustees, and you have a beneficiary. And you could have additional roles, but those are the absolute minimum, irreducible four to make a good trust and for it to stand up, just like a table has to stand up. And if you remove one of those legs, it's going to fall over.
Yes, that's obviously much more stable than a three-legged table.
Next question. What court, if any, has jurisdiction over a natural law trust?
Well, unless there's a suit, no, there's no court jurisdiction. In other words, the court doesn't have any jurisdiction over the trust unless there's a suit that comes from somebody else, third party.
Would I be correct in assuming that even in that case, it wouldn't have jurisdiction over the validity of the trust, but only over the actions of its trust officers?
Yes. And that's why, again, I say don't put your vehicles, boats, airplanes, etc., in the trust because they can create a liability. So we're trying to eliminate any liability. And that's why I also try to keep the separation in between the grantor and the trustees.
Okay. Moving on through a few different comments here. You mentioned that there is no government reporting. Does that mean gains are tax-free as well, or only that the origination efforts to create the trust and also later trustee actions do not require government approval or oversight? Thank you.
Yes, the latter part is correct. Depending on what goes on later on, there may or may not be a tax liability. It all depends. It's an individual case-by-case scenario. If you run a big business, well, it depends what state you are. If you're in a state that has an excise tax, then the trust would be responsible for the excise tax, or the business that's held by the trust.
Yeah, we basically usually say that the trust intrinsically has no, by its design, it's not statutory, so it's not typically under any statutes required to file a return. But Randall has to be careful as well, and we always say that it's a case-by-case basis thing, and that it simply gives control to the creators of the trust over what decisions they want to make regarding tax liability.
Right, and typically, well, not typically, but a lot of times, the idea is that let's say the trust has a really lucrative business, and they can keep part of that profit for enhancing the business. And then they take part of it and they give the beneficiaries the rest. And so there's no tax liability on the trust. Any tax liability would go to the beneficiaries.
All right. The next question is, it was said earlier about separate trusts. My question is, would it be beneficial or wise to separate the assets in their own sub-trusts? For example, precious metals on one sub-trust, currency under another sub-trust, currency 2, 3, and 4 in their respective sub-trusts.
If you have a couple of $1 million houses, I would say to definitely put each one in its own trust. You have a valuable car, $500,000 antique car, then yes, but put it in a different trust than everything else. So each valuable asset can be separated. Now, if you have, let's go back to the currency part. If you have significant amounts of currency and it's going to be extremely valuable, then I would say to have a trust for each currency.
The next
And
question's kind of
okay.
related to that. It says, do we need separate trusts for each asset? So it's kind of the same type of question.
Yeah, no, and I would suggest that if I just lost my train of thought, but if you only if it's a, I think it, you know, if you have that question, then please just email me and I'll delicately show you how to thread the needle.
Well, that's a good point to bring up for those who are new, is that communication with Randall is only by paid trust clients with House of Freedom Trust through Brilliance and Commerce. However, anyone, anywhere can submit a question at houseoffreedomtrust.com with dashes between each of the words at our contact us. And we answer help desk tickets. And if we who work for Brilliance and Commerce don't know the answer, we'll get the answer from Randall and pass it on to you. So we're very happy to communicate with anyone in that way. Now, this next question, can my existing Wyoming State USA LLC, where I transferred my currencies and some private stock, be used as a smaller holding account for a major pouring of gains for daily usage, or is there a better usage?
Well, the LLC, where it doesn't matter what state it's in, that LLC is allowed to spend that money any way that the owner of the LLC desires to. And ultimately, a lot of people ask me that, and I say, the way I set it up is I have the LLC being the out front office space. In other words, the storefront. The LLC would be the storefront, and the trust would be the owner of the LLC, along with usually you want to have a real person be one of the owners of the LLC. But the trust could own 98% of the LLC. The LLC does all the spending, pays all the owners. Let's say that two people do most of the work, then they could be paid, and then the profit could then revert back to the trust.
I was just reading through some of these chat items here. Do you have a brochure on trustee responsibilities?
I don't. It's usually in the trust indenture itself, but I'm sure I could make up a small, like a brief scenario of that. I mean, that's what we talked about today. The duties are to protect and enhance the assets, and that is done in any way the trustees feel appropriate. That'd be the premise of it.
It would sort of depend on the wishes of the grantor or settler, yes?
Well, yes, initially, because when the grantor chooses his trustees and he sets it up initially and he puts in the assets, then his desires are made known to the trustees, and the trustees coordinate and take care of the assets in that direction. And if it's a healthier, more enlarged portfolio, then the trustees may want to hire an asset management program as well.
Interesting question here. When you become an angel, where would we continue to receive excellent service of all kinds in the future? Are you the central brain trust? Can normally trained attorneys understand and then amend as may be necessary if you have passed over and living in paradise? I guess the person is basically asking, if you become unavailable, what happens?
It's on you, Tanzan. You're going to have to take over since you're going to live to be 150,000 years old. No, it all can be taken care of. The manual that you get, the documentation that's available, there's plenty of information out there. I can put a short bibliography together, and there's some pretty simple books. I just don't want people to go and get any book off the shelf, because a lot of it's going to be statutory or just about setting up a AV revocable trust, and you don't want that. But
yeah, I would recommend being on our Brilliance and Commerce newsletter list, because we'll provide news about things like that. And also the Charles Arthur books, the Passing the Buck and the Charles Arthur newsletter, which we've been recommending in our Brilliance and Commerce newsletters.
It gives a lot of information, and those are two books that will give you a sense of what's going on. But until you have the trust document, it's going to be a little overwhelming. I've read them both 2 or 3 times. I get the newsletter every month for the last 2 years. There's quite a bit of information, but I'm very familiar with the information that's in there. And for somebody that's new, Tanzan, what we could do is could set it up so that if somebody really has a strong interest, they could get the newsletter, the Charles Arthur newsletter, and then we could make the trust manual available. It's basically tells you what to do with the trust, but it would give everybody an idea of what they would need to do to make it work if I'm not available. But it's something you and I would talk about, but I'm very willing to let that be available.
Well, on the other hand, you're going to live for a ripe old age of 500 or 1,000, aren't you?
I've already been there.
This person asks, what is the RV exchange, please? And I'll just say briefly, won't devote this webinar to that, but a lot of our trust clients have invested in certain international currencies that are undervalued and that are expected to revalue and produce a lot of wealth very quickly because of the revaluation, such as Iraqi dinars, Vietnamese dong, Zimbabwe dollars, Indonesian rupiah, and so on. A lot of the forces in the world have devalued those currencies arbitrarily. And so our House of Freedom trusts are meant to protect assets of any kind. It just happens that a lot of people who have those currencies became interested in these trusts, who follow world events.
Well, you would want that because once that takes place, you would have significant amount of new wealth. And if you already have those in a trust, then there's no tax liability. So it would be advantageous, and then you can go out and you can use, again, if you can do one, or you could do 3 trusts. Let's say for now you don't have enough money, you could do 3 unactivated trusts and have your currency, each currency in a separate trust. And then when you go to the reval, then it would all go to that trust, and it would be separated out. Then each trust can go and do as it pleases with that new wealth.
Now, there's a couple of raised hands and also a question from Carrie. I'll go ahead and read Carrie's question. She says, can you speak to how it works for me if I'm A, trustee, or B, beneficiary, or C, grantor, how it can serve me best on a regular basis, reasons to do either, and if expenditures are going out from the trust for regular operations. So that's your question. I'll just add that this kind of dovetails on your previous discussion, talking about the person asking about a manual and further education and what happens about the trust roles, and is there a brochure and that sort of thing. On our website, that whole section on the roles of the beneficiary, trustee, and grantor or settler is at least a beginning of coverage of that topic. And then Randall and the books we mentioned can provide more in depth. But did you understand Carrie's question?
Yeah, and it's a matter of choice. It's decide whether you want to be the grantor and the manager and the beneficiary, or you want, like I have clients that are adamant that they want to be the trustee so that they have the checkbook, because as I think we talked about last week, some banks don't want the executive manager to be on the signature card. They only want the trustees. So some people are adamant. It depends on the bank. Again, it used to be when we first started, I could walk into any bank and as the executive manager and sign a bank account up right then and there. But now it's different because of the 9/11 and all that stuff that happened. The banks are now know your customer, and they want both trustees. I've had people call me all of a sudden and say, they won't let me open up the account. I said, did you take the trustees with you? And she said, no, I walked in myself. And I said, well, you're going to have to go another day and take your trustees with you, because that's what they want now. Or at least that's what most banks want.
So that topic alone could cover hours, and that's why we have the ebook on natural law trusts and the sections in the website that discuss this. But briefly, you have pros and cons either way. If you're the trustee, yeah, there's more convenience. You don't have to go to someone else to open the bank account and sign on it. You don't have to get, wishes fulfilled. On the other hand, you have more responsibility. You should have gone up the learning curve a bit more, because now you have both you have both legal and practical control.
Yes. And like I said, you can also, if you have an independent, non-related second trustee, you could be one of the beneficiaries, as long as there are other beneficiaries listed. Now, I mean, you can also, as trustee, pay yourself a salary. The trustees can be paid a salary, and the beneficiaries are just given the profit or loss of what happens at the end of the year. If there's a significant profit, then you give it to the beneficiaries, and then the tax liability is on them. So it's your choice. You can choose to be the grantor and sit back and relax, or you can be a trustee and be very active in the process of the trust.
Okay, we have a hand up here from area code 561. I'm unmuting you and asking whoever is at area code 561, are you available?
Yes, I am.
Hi, welcome to the show. What's your question?
Question. What's the advantage, if any, of having non-voting trustees?
I don't understand what non-voting means. The non-voting is like shareholders, non-voting shareholders. The trustees must make decisions. And so it's not up to a vote. They have to make a unanimous decision.
Well, that's a vote, but of course.
Okay, so you call it a vote, but there aren't any, if you have, say, 3 trustees, they all have to say yes. So I guess you could call it a vote, but it's either yes or no.
Okay. Do trustees operate on the basis of majority or unanimity?
You have to be unanimous in your decisions.
So if you have 5 trustees, all 5 have to say yes?
Yes.
That's a good reason not to have too many trustees.
Yes. I would just hold it to 2 trustees, and you get to know each other. And the idea is that both those trustees have taken that or accepted that appointment so that they can support the grantor's wishes and take care of the beneficiaries.
I would say one of the only reasons to have additional trustees is if the 2 trustees are at risk of dying or disappearing somehow, you know.
Wouldn't that be the purpose of a successor trustee?
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to have them anyway. But what you do along the way, part of the minutes is you have a list and you say, if so-and-so, if one of the trustees dies, then I want this trustee to come in, or the remaining trustee has to go and find somebody on his own. But you can set it up with the grantor in the beginning that if one of the trustees decides to leave, then he has a say in helping the other trustee get the trustee that he wants to have. But ultimately, the remaining trustee would have to choose the trustee, and if he's related to the grantor, then they'd have to have a non-related trustee.
I appreciate it. And some literature I have read was where you have a number of trustees, and let's assume 2 could be voting and the other 3 could be non-voting to meet the requirements.
The way my trust is set up is it's a unanimous decision.
Okay, all right.
I mean, and let me add this, is once that happens, you could have the trustees could make an amendment or a change and say, we'd like to have 3 trustees or more, depending on the amount of work that needs to be done. But that's when you're talking about significant amounts of assets. Let's leave it at that.
Right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So I guess the number of trustees would be partly influenced by how much wealth is in the trust and how much business activity.
Yeah, but there can be a lot of wealth in the trust. Could have multi-millions of dollars in the trust, and two trustees that's all you really need, because they can hire wealth management personnel.
That's true. And secretaries and so forth.
Do the work, but they
Mhm.
would be the two trustees that would have ultimate responsibility to make it all continue to work.
And they can hire a treasurer and so on.
Sure.
Yeah.
You can hire CPA, any management, any management company, whatever is the desire of the trustees to enhance their responsibility and duty is to enhance and protect the trust assets.
The reason we don't want just one trustee, and at least I'll give the bank's perspective on that, and you can add anything else. The bank will think, well, all right, we're holding the funds for this trust, and this trustee is the signatory, and they always want, an emergency number. What happens to that signatory? Who else in your family or who else in your business can we contact if something happens to you?
Right.
And that's why you either want another current trustee or a successor trustee.
Successor trustee, and the successor trustee signs the documents in the beginning, and then he just sits back and waits until something happens. He doesn't have to have an active role.
Right. This person is asking, what if the assets go into the trust before the EIN is acquired?
Nothing. The EIN number is strictly for the bank. But let's say in the part of currency, like if you put a house in trust and you're really not going to have a bank account for it, then you wouldn't need an EIN number. But if you're doing currency, you want to have that number already there so that when it happens, it's ready to go. The rest of the trust is put together. The EIN number is there. You can walk into the bank with the trustees and you've got an account open.
All right. This person's asking, can a trustee, perhaps a son, be also beneficiary and have a beneficial interest? If so, how long might the protection from the spendthrift provision run?
I would not have him be a trustee and the only beneficiary. In other words, if the trustee if he's a trustee and a beneficiary, I would have him choose to be one or the other, or I would add more beneficiaries to the trust.
Right. And he continues, can that same beneficial interest be reinstated later for that same trustee beneficiary?
Yes, but again, I'm suggesting that you don't just have that one person as the beneficiary. If he's just the beneficiary, then have two unrelated trustees to the beneficiary.
Otherwise, the trustee is holding assets on behalf of himself. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
right.
And there's no separation.
Right.
You could, there's examples where the person establishes a trust, the grantor, and he makes himself the trustee, and he acts as long as he's not the only beneficiary, he may have himself and his children and grandchildren be beneficiaries, but he can't be the sole beneficiary.
Okay. This person says, if one of the trustees lives in Panama and the first trustee lives in the U.S., how does that change things as far as jurisdiction of the trust? Can I get a email address in Australia, for example, and have the jurisdiction there?
You can move the jurisdiction of the trust anytime you want. In other words, the trust is allowed to go to any part of the country. Once it's established, it can go anywhere it wants. Now, let's say it starts in the US and you get an EIN number. You can go to any part of the world, and if they are open to accepting trusts as a mechanism of holding assets, then that wouldn't be an issue. They may or may not require you to get one of their numbers. It depends.
Well, to go back to the first part of the question, if one of the trustees lives in Panama and the first trustee lives in the U.S., how does that change things?
Then make it a U.S. trust and get an EIN number, and then the Panamanian person can be the second trustee, and it shouldn't be an issue. Now, and then if they decide that they want to, they both operate down in Panama, then they take that with them, and it's an already established trust. So, is that second trustee already in Panama, or are they going to Panama? Like one is in the U.S. and one is in Panama?
Right.
Then have the address be in the U.S. in the beginning and get a U.S. EIN number, and then take it to Panama. I believe I have a friend that just came back from there, and he has his trust there too.
Now, I might just add, Randall, that this may confuse some people who thought that our trusts are sovereign, is that the trust itself isn't under any jurisdiction per se.
No.
I think what you're referring to is simply its location of operation and where any kind of arbitration or litigation might occur if an incident were to occur.
Yes, it can operate. Let's okay, so let's say this person is in the U.S. You use a U.S. address and get an EIN number, and the other person's in Panama. And they go down to Panama and they do business through the use of this trust entity. And then they decide to go farther south or over to Europe. They take this already established entity and go and do there, or they go to that country and establish something, and one of the owners of the company is the trust. Again, like what I often use is say, create an LLC and have the trust own the LLC and do, like, let's say you have multiple businesses, then LLCs you can get overnight for $25 online in the US and get an EIN number for it. And then the owner would be, say, 98% of the trust and 2% for the person or the two people that establish it. And it can go anywhere and create multiple fingers for this trust to work. The trust is your home base.
That's a very good idea. So are we ready for the next question? I think we're just about done here. We should probably wrap it up, but we still have a few questions. Can the grantor be related to the beneficiary if the trustee is not related?
Well, sure, the grantor is usually, if he's not going to be a trustee, then he usually is one of the beneficiaries, or he has his children or grandchildren or anybody be the beneficiaries.
And the rest of the question is a girlfriend or boyfriend unmarried considered as related in regards to the trustee position?
Oh, I don't know. That's a little close, but yes, they're not, if they're not related, depends on what you call related. And I don't know, that's an iffy question, but I would suggest that at least if that couple wants to do that, that they have a non-related, another friend be a trustee as well.
Well, what would be a practical
Because
problem?
if they got married, then they'd be related.
Yeah. What would be a practical problem arising out of it?
Well, the example would be if they decide to get married, then they'd need to have an unrelated trustee. They could do it at first. They could do it at first, but what happens if they break up and they hate each other? Then
Right.
you got somebody that's your adversary now. So it's a little dicey.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be like if a couple decides to get divorced. Let's say the wife is the grantor and the husband is the trustee. The beneficiaries are themselves and their kids. Then then it would be, that's where you want to have that non-related trustee to say, look, Ralph, simmer down, we're going to take care of this. And then the court and the judgment decree would either give one or the other part of the couple a certain percentage of the beneficial interest of the other partner.
Here's a good question. If future trustees were to not follow the trust rules and powers accurately for their own gain, how does one resolve this issue? You may want to bring up about a protector and all
Yes,
that.
there in the document is a page for a protector. And that protector must not be related to the grantor, trustees, or beneficiaries. And if one of the trustees is not doing their job, then the protector comes in and said, here's your walking papers, sir. And then they appoint, the protector himself would appoint another trustee. But if it's a non-related trustee, he would have to appoint a non-related trustee. If the trustee is related that he fires, then you could have another related trustee. But the protector can hire or fire the trustees if he feels that there's any lack of focus, malfeasance, or trustees just not doing their job. And trustee, yes, I see a question. Trustee, the protector can be added later. Yes, not a problem.
And the one who appoints the protector is?
The grantor.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So if someone was interested in becoming a personal trustee, I believe this person means professional trustee, what might that path look like? Is there a certification?
Not that I know of, but there's a lot of reading involved. And if that person, if you feel it's appropriate, then that person can receive my email, and what I'll do is I'll write a short bibliography of books that I use and I can point to, and then they can explore that themselves. But most of the trustees that I've worked with over the years are not professional at all, but with the trust manual available and a few books on the shelf that I can relate to you, they have enough knowledge to really make it work. It's not a complicated process.
Right.
It's just intelligent decisions.
Well, thank you. Mahalo, as we say in Hawaii. It's almost 6 o'clock here on the West Coast. There's one question that's very easy, and I think I can even, it just says, but if you don't have a second trustee, you can satisfy that requirement by naming a successor trustee instead, correct?
Yes.
Right. We kind of said that before. Yep. Okay, I think we just about got all of them. If you didn't have a question answered and you had something that we didn't get to, please go to our website and submit a ticket. Just go to contact us and submit a ticket, and we'll be more than happy to continue this process in the next day or two. We usually get tickets answered in a day or two. And why don't we move to the final images, and we'll just go ahead and conclude. And thank you very, very kindly. We're going to have another webinar coming up February the 7th. I believe that's on one of the next images. Yep, February 7th. Same time, same station, but we will send out the different link. We're going to use different links every time. Otherwise, the links could expire or whatever. So watch the Brilliance in Commerce newsletters or whatever source you learn this from. If you have an affiliate sending information to you, watch that same source of information for the link and the number, because the phone number will remain the same, but the identification number, the code that you put in for the meeting when you dial the phone number will change. So those new codes will be published each month in each successive newsletter regarding the next webinar. So February 7th, Wednesday, and then Wednesday, March 7th, and Wednesday, April 11th. And everyone, really appreciate all of you being here with us today. These are excellent questions. We're building a better world together. We've drawn this knowledge from many, many sources and from what works. We're not relying upon some sort of university degree or certification from any government agency or anything like that. We've just learned, like the super rich did, from experience and from actually implementing and practicing what we're talking about. All of these things we're talking about, we actually live and do in our own lives. So we're not just talking theory here. We're talking, for those of you on the telephone, house-of-freedom-trust.com is the generic website, but if you have a link given to you by an affiliate who referred you, we would much rather you use that, please. And then on the next slide, I think we have our phone number, the 360 number. For those of you listening by phone or driving in the car, we will provide phone answers, but we prefer a ticket submitted. It's much easier to coordinate in writing than it is by phone. But we do have a few people who can't get access to the internet from time to time, and they do need to phone us for whatever reason. Let's see, the next image. Is there one more? That is 360-200-7521. You would think I should have memorized it by now.
I thought I told you not to show the picture of my house.
Oh, darn. Oh, shoot. Well, I didn't know they had houses like that in Hawaii.
Yeah, in my mind.
Okay, everyone. Thank you. We bless you.
I thank all you people, too, for your beautiful questions, and looking forward to next month.
Absolutely.
Aloha and mahalo nui loa.
Aloha.